We tend to consume the news as a series of isolated events. We see a missile test here, an economic embargo there, and protests filling a capital city across the world, and we treat them as separate, disconnected stories. In reality, the strain in one region pulls directly at the fabric of another. It's a synchronized stress test of the very systems that run the world. As this diagram illustrates, predicting where this leads requires looking at prophecy as a pattern. It requires stepping back until the scattered data points connect to form the recognizable shape of a changing era. Across different continents, populations are outgrowing the structures built to manage them. The methods of control and fear that kept nations in line for the last century are buckling under the weight of modern economic and social pressure. The breakdown of these old systems forces a difficult realization. We are watching the painful, real-time exposure of humanity's moral limits. Highly coercive states project an image of permanence, but history shows they rarely fall to dramatic foreign invasions. Instead, they decay slowly, hollowing out from the inside until the center can no longer sustain itself. Take Cuba. For decades, the regime has maintained discipline through strict state control. Yet, if a distant conflict suddenly disrupted global oil flows and trade routes, those aging power structures would face immense pressure to open the economy simply to survive the supply shock. This flowchart shows the mechanics of a typical transition. When forced to reform, the individuals who once controlled ideology often transfer their control to licenses, ports, and banks. They trade their vocabulary of state protection for one of market efficiency. This is known as elite capture, where a ruling class monopolizes the financial benefits of an opening, ensuring the same people sit at the cash register. North Korea uses a different survival mechanism. The state projects authority through massive military displays, maintaining that image by feeding a privileged core of loyalists and security forces, while deliberately depriving the outer provinces of basic resources. Citizens forced to rely on informal black markets to eat learn a highly dangerous lesson. The state is not the sole source of life. Once people compare official propaganda with their own daily survival, the regime loses its psychological grip long before it loses its physical weapons. It tests missiles and escalates rhetoric, using the threat of external conflict to manufacture panic and enforce strict domestic loyalty. In both closed societies, the final test is not how many foreign contracts are signed or borders crossed. The test is whether citizens can reclaim their agency before the existing power structure successfully rebrands itself. Other nations face a severe crisis of national identity. In Iran, decades of clerical rule have created deep cultural exhaustion, forcing a population to live divided between public obedience and private resistance. Imagine the emergence of a female leader in this environment. Women have already paid the highest price in their refusal to be silenced by the state. A woman stepping into national authority would subvert a system that has relied entirely on performative masculinity and social control. Replacing the figurehead at the top does not automatically erase authoritarian habits. To secure true representation, a society has to dismantle the ingrained legal frameworks and cultural routines of humiliation that outlast the regimes that built them. Japan faces a different collision between history and power. Since the mid-20th century, the country has defined itself through advanced economic production and strict legal limits on its own military capacity. That carefully maintained restraint is now colliding with geography. With missile threats and regional coercion increasing year after year, Japan is being pressured to leave its pacifist assumptions behind and harden its military posture. The nation built its modern reputation and regional trust by stepping away from war after experiencing total physical devastation. Rebuilding a capable defense force requires Japan to navigate the narrow, difficult space between acquiring necessary strategic strength and preserving its hard-won moral authority. Neither a change in leadership nor a larger defense budget can solve these deep-seated crises of identity. The future of both nations depends on establishing a foundation of moral legitimacy that can actually survive the weight of their own history. These regional struggles over borders, resources, and identity are severe, yet they operate on a strictly human scale. They act as a localized warm-up for a much larger test of civilizational coordination. Consider a deadline no military can argue with, a credible, time-limited threat from the sky, an asteroid on a direct collision course with Earth. In an ideal scenario, the cold reality of orbital mechanics, the physics of how objects move in space, strips away our political vanity. Nations pool their tracking systems, open their data, and mount a unified, species-level scientific defense. The alternative is a total collapse into epistemic chaos, a state where a society loses its shared agreement on basic facts. Instead of collaboration, the response splinters into competing propaganda, hidden military launches, and arguments over which nation gets to control the narrative. We do not need an asteroid to see this vulnerability. Our capacity to build destructive weapons and complex algorithms has vastly outpaced our political and spiritual ability to manage them responsibly. The fractures we see on the news are not random anomalies. They act as a mirror, exposing the gap between our technological power and our collective wisdom. Acknowledging that gap is the required first step before we can actually begin to close it.